And I just want to say welcome, everybody. I'm really super happy that you made it to our peer-to-peer forum. We haven't had one in a while. And I'm super excited that this one is going to be done about funeral homes and funeral directors and how to get started in doing it and doing green funerals. So welcome. My name is Gretchen Spletzer. I am the administrative coordinator for the Green Burial Council's C6 side of our organization, because we are two. We are C6 that does the certification of funeral homes, cemeteries, and products. And then we have a C3, which is the educational side of our organization. So tonight's topic is all about green funerals and serving the families that seek them out, and probably a bunch of other things as well. So before I introduce our speakers, I just wanted to say that we're gonna do the questions at the end of the talk tonight. So if you use the raising hand symbol, nobody's gonna answer it. So just if you have a question, put it in the chat box and Ryan or I will get the question to Elizabeth and Amy at the end. And also this is being recorded and it is going to eventually live on YouTube. So if you don't want to be public, then you probably shouldn't talk. Well, I guess you wouldn't be talking because you would be putting your question in the chat. So let's see. So I'm going to introduce Elizabeth and Amy. So Amy is going to speak first tonight, but I'll introduce her and then I'll introduce Elizabeth and then we'll let Amy have the floor. So Amy Cunningham is a licensed funeral director and celebrant in Brooklyn, New York. She specializes in green burials in cemeteries that are certified by the GBC. She also does delayed transfers, home funerals, and witnessed cremation services in the Greenwood Cemetery's gorgeous crematory chapel. And then Elizabeth Fournier is the owner and operator of Cornerstone Funeral Services outside Portland, Oregon, in a tiny town called Boring. She is known as the Green Reaper, a name affectionately given as the Green Burial Director, Educator, and Advocate, who is always ready to lend a hand or a shovel. And she is the author of the Green Burial Guidebook. So Amy, if you want to take over, I'll mute myself. And
thank you, Gretchen.
Welcome.
Hi, everybody. I saw 5 minutes of the news before coming on Zoom tonight and adapted a little blessing that I thought I would read, and lighting a candle for the folks we're thinking about in Florida. Unite us to our sisters and brothers in Florida tonight in their time of need, comfort and heal the injured, the bereaved, the lost, strengthen the aid workers and medical personnel, bolster the resolve of our government and those with power to help, open through all this destruction pathways to partnership and peace. I just thought I'd keep a little candle going as we talk. So hi. We're going to start by introducing, telling our stories and how we got into funeral directing and earth-friendly work. About 45% of my funerals these days are green burials. The rest is cremation. I entered the funeral business to uplift people generally. I didn't know when my father died in 2009 that there was a green burial movement. I was just captivated by the whole arc of care that he received and the beautiful funeral we arranged thanks to his stated wishes. So Dad's funeral was a direct cremation and he had a very music infused memorial event, but I came out of that experience just captivated as a magazine journalist. I was a magazine writer, just amazed at how powerful the funeral had been and how healing. So within 6 months of my dad's death here in Brooklyn, I was enrolled in mortuary school. I was 54 years old. So lesson one is that it's never too late to start. And then mortuary school, I was an English major at the University of Virginia 33 years earlier than I started mortuary school. And it took everything out of me. It was tough. It was a lot of rote memorization and using my brain in a way that I wasn't used to using. After that rigorous year of anatomy, pathology, microbiology, I had a year-long residency. This is the requirement of anyone seeking to be a licensed director. Only then, really, after my residency, did I apply myself to getting people's attention and draw them to green burial. So I feel so honored to be a part of the movement. The National Home Funeral Alliance, those conferences, back when I first started, were very, very valuable. Any integrative kind of thanatology program was also supportive. I left the man who trained me after 3 years. And once I was licensed and ready to go, I started my own firm with $20,000 in family savings. So I'll stop there. And I'm very interested in Elizabeth's path and how she began to do earth-friendly work in boring.
Awesome. And thank you for sharing that. I love to hear that. I've read so much about you. And I'm actually 54 now. So it's kind of fun to hear where you started, where this is. So I was the little kid that had half my family die when I was in grade school. And how I dealt with that was we had a kind of a sand pit in the yard, and I had to deal with my grief. There wasn't counseling and those sort of things you'd go to back in the early 70s. So I'd make graves and play funeral, and then I'd build something on my dresser that looked like caskets or a cemetery. And, if the bird passed away, I give it a little burial in the yard, or I bless the friend's space that their hamster was buried in. And my dad always thought, this is the phase, you'll sort of move through this. So when it came time for college, I was thinking I'd go to mortuary school. My father said, oh, darling, again, this is a phase, you'll move through this. So I was at a lovely private beautiful institution. And as I spent time going to school there, I thought, something's sort of missing here. This isn't really, mortuary school really seems where I need to be. So I took a job living in a cemetery, and I was the night keeper at a cemetery in Portland, Oregon, and moved into the cemetery. And of course, in college, everybody said, what are you doing? This is so weird. Why do you want to, live and work with dead people? You look so normal. What's your problem? So, the understanding of it was strange. My dad thought this was a phase. Other people said, what's going on? But unless you work in death and dying and cemetery work and bereavement, you don't understand the pull towards it. I think most of us on this call understand there's something which actually gets you here. So sharing my story is part of saying, hey, where I am now, you can do this without having a family funeral home that's going to be handed to you, or having deep pockets where you can buy something. Ultimately, I ended up graduating from my school. I got jobs. I was the night keeper, and I was the first call person late at night. So to subsequent that, I had to teach ballroom dancing at Arthur Murray. And then I was in the San Francisco Bay Area working for SEI and working services here and there. And to supplement that, I got a job with an agent, and I became a voiceover actor. So, funeral work, first lesson, take any job you can get if you don't have a job. You might not look like the right hours, the right place, what you're really looking at, but it's important to get your foot in. So for 32 years now, I have been working solidly in the funeral industry. And how the green came, as I've worked for several corporations. I've been with Carriage and Lowen and Alderwoods and SCI and all of these, and really had great experiences there. And I'm so thrilled I worked there. I wouldn't have met my beloved husband if I hadn't worked for SCI. And he was living in one of the funeral homes in the little apartment. this is a little tiny funeral home in the middle of nowhere. A man had 40 acres. He had a barn. He repurposed it into a funeral home, thought he'd run the place. And the mortuary board said, sir, great idea. However, you really need a licensed person to come in here. People knew I wasn't really fulfilled working where I was working. I had a childhood fantasy of what I thought being an undertaker would be. And it would be providing these services for family and sort of holding people's hands through the services and not really upselling things. And so I ended up out here and this tiny funeral home where one phone call a month, meaning, one person passed away, nothing was really going on. Pretty soon the man who owned the place couldn't pay me. And for about 2 years, I lived off my own credit cards, my own financing, my boyfriend at the time's money. And we just made it work. And everybody said, oh my gosh, this is the phase. What are you doing? And so there was all that along the way saying, this isn't a traditional job. Are you going to go to mortuary school? Are you going to actually, get a real job? But I thought, no, I'm a female and owning a funeral home back in the 2000 era. How's that going to happen? I'm going to stick in and I'm going to make it work. So now we're up to about 35 people pass away a month. I'm one funeral director. It's a 7-day-a-week job. And how I became green was a short period of time after being here. Somebody called and wanted to keep their loved one on their own property, and they wanted to bury on their own property. And I said, I've never done that before because I've worked for either the Catholic Cemeteries, I've worked for a corporation, but I want to help you do this. And we stuck in there together. We figured it out. And with a short period of time, the phone was ringing saying, are you that girl in the country who buries people in their yards? Can we do this? And now after perseverance and talking to every single cemetery around, we have about 14 cemeteries in the Portland metro area that allow natural burial, including our national cemetery. And it's just perseverance, keeping your eye on the goal, going. And one thing I'm happy to say, we were talking to Amy earlier, in my state, I didn't want to be an embalmer, therefore I didn't have to go to mortuary school. So that's an option for people who are switching careers if your state doesn't make you do that. Dual license never interested me. I'm on 40 acres. I don't own my building. I don't own the 40 acres, but I own the funeral home. So finding a funeral home that somebody needed to take over and pretty soon giving it the love it needs and being able to turn it into what you want. So I'll stop there. But just so you know, Amy and I both had completely different paths, and here we are.
Yeah, that triggers some thoughts on my part about how funeral service is all of funeral service, that in your training, it's very valuable, even in your heart, if you very much want to be natural, to go ahead and get engaged in Roman Catholic services that involve embalming. You don't have to be the embalmer. You can work with people who are skilled at that. And I found that my natural practice is fortified by my work in all funerals. Hindu funerals are generally almost always cremations. And what a blessing it has been to witness those kinds of services. So I do get letters, as I know you also get, Elizabeth, from men and women saying, how do I become a green funeral director? And I would advise anyone to embrace it all, see it all, and you'll be a better manager and able to tend to the needs of all people. And sometimes you can redirect a family coming in for one kind of service. You might, the other day I had an Italian family, and I said, I don't think we're going to need to embalm. And they said, really? That's great. So with refrigeration out of the firm where I am, I partner with a Jewish group. And since Jewish service does not involve embalming, we're very good colleagues. I've been a natural type since I was a girl. I ate so much brewer's yeast on the morning I took my SAT as a high school kid that I was burping all the way through the exam. I remember I just always embraced natural things. So that core of my personality has been helpful to me in all aspects of my healthcare and the birthing of my 2 children, and it's been a wonderful guide in funeral service also. So we know we're right. We feel strongly about it, but we have to kind of grow a kind of tolerance and interest in everything and embrace it all. So I don't need to go on too long about that, but I do think that's important to say. We both
Yeah,
have
families.
PowerPoints.
I'll just quickly say that families don't know the questions to ask. They don't know the options. They don't know all of the green forms of disposition. And it's not our job to make up the minds for them. It's just our jobs and our ethics as a funeral director to direct, be able to give information, to advocate, and let them make their own choices. But families are really thrilled when they know that they can build their own casket, or they can maybe choose a cremation that's eco-friendly, or all of these options. And just like her person who said, oh my gosh, I don't have to embalm. A lot of people assume before even a cremation happens, the body needs to be embalmed. So it's just educating as we go and just gently holding people's hand and guiding them along.
Yep. And sometimes it's educating your manager or your boss at the funeral home, and showing them the statistics that are coming out within the funeral industry about how interested Americans are in natural, earth-friendly funeral service. With that, I could share my screen. Let's see. Is that working? But I have to make it larger. Bear with me.
Beautiful.
Wait a minute. It's just something about the way this is. I can't quite get to, here it is. Thanks, guys. So I'm presenting earth-friendly funeral service to funeral directors these days. So these are bits of a PowerPoint I presented at a funeral directors conference recently. So when I say our own industry, I'm referring to the funeral industry. Surveys show that between 61 and 84% of survey respondents are interested in environmentally sustainable funeral and cemetery options. So if you have an employer who's saying, oh, I don't think there's any interest in earth-friendly burial in our community, or if you meet with a cemeterian who is skeptical about the green burial movement, tell them, hey, look, even the funeral industry is supporting this now and getting these results in their surveys. A lot of the teaching I do involves the phases of a green burial. And I need to correct myself because I'm trying to use the word natural burial, because not everybody knows what green is. I think the word natural it communicates that we're talking about an authentic funeral without chemicals, where there are fewer impediments to the body's return naturally to the soil. So when I speak to celebrants and funeral directors about the stages of a green burial, these are the stages I discuss, from the drive to the cemetery to the final separation at the cemetery. So I just thought tonight, both of us have short PowerPoints, and I would guide you through this a little bit. Shrouded burials are so terrific, and it's always a powerful experience for the funeral director or funeral celebrant or home funeral guide or family member to have a deceased person in their automobile. So for me as a director, the ceremony begins when I'm driving to the ceremony in the cemetery. And this is my time to play the deceased's favorite music and collect myself and keep the flowers upright and get to the cemetery in a serene kind of mindset. I really try to meditate on the person I'm carrying. I feel like these green burials are so very, very powerful to secular and religious families, because that metaphor of coming from the earth and returning to it and finding new life, turning into something else is so integral, that this body has usefulness to the earth. So in the back of the car, I'll have maybe some kind of lavender or cedar branches or rose petals that I'll help the family with when we arrive. If I'm blessed enough to be guiding a family that's had the whole event in a home, it's particularly transporting. Here in New York, families cannot drive themselves to the cemetery with the deceased in the back. So I often lead a kind of procession with flowers and the body of the deceased in the car. We always have a welcoming of the body when we arrive at the cemetery, all together, adorning, maybe using essential oils, maybe exposing the face in this moment so that they have a viewing. But if you're working with an employer who's uncomfortable with shrouds or uncomfortable with not embalming, I've been having incredibly powerful viewings at this moment of arrival to the cemetery with people just touching the face of the deceased, even over the shroud. Not everyone wants a viewing or prolonged exposure of the face, but recently a wife was just touching the deceased man's face, saying, "Oh, I know the chin, I know that beard," and having a very, very wonderful experience there. The procession is something we've lost in other kinds of funeral service, this idea of carrying the weight, feeling the weight of our dead, and processing. We saw in Queen Elizabeth's funeral all that marching around. Well, so too, even with cremation service, we should try to work in some kind of march down the aisle, or to the grave, or to the crematory. I'm celebrant, and I use a lot of readings. I'm not going to take time tonight to read all these lovely passages from poems, but this march is, I think, the most exquisite part of a green burial. And we're going to address green washing this evening. I know that's a big question on everybody's minds. These caskets that a lot of funeral directors are using in green burials are made in Bangladesh, and they're less expensive than the hand woven caskets I've been buying from Mary Lauren Fraser in Massachusetts. So this is imported. It's had a trip on an airplane. It's a lot less expensive than what is domestically available. This, to me, is my preference. It's wild. It's fantastic. It's a crazy good casket. This one costs me, my price is with the transportation about $2,500, whereas this casket, my price is about, with freight and delivery to Brooklyn, about $795. That's my price before I try to support myself a tiny bit with it. No way is my markup like others. But anyway, we'll discuss all this, because one casket gives a local artist income. The other casket gives an emerging economy in another part of the world employment and jobs. This is the grave prep at a natural cemetery like Steelman Town, where Ed Bixby does such a nice job with the setup here. These evergreen boughs are good for covering a shrouded body.
Amy, I don't know if you can hear me.
Sure.
We're just seeing the first photo of your presentation. It
Oh
hasn't.
my Lord!
Sorry to interrupt.
All this time?
Yeah, I'm so sorry, Amy. I've been sending you some messages. I didn't want to interrupt, but yeah,
Oh,
if you minimize your PowerPoint and then you
yeah,
open
let's
it
get
back
out
up,
of this.
we should
Sorry,
be-
guys.
Oh,
Let me get out. Stop the share. How weird.
yeah. Do you want me to share?
Yes, put the PowerPoint up and then we'll just zoom through those images.
Everyone wants to see that casket.
So there's the industry survey. There are the stages. I'm happy to, send you copies. Here's my moment in the car collecting myself. This is a beautiful shroud. You can back up, Ryan, by Esmeralda Kent of Kincarico, and then the family's scarf on top. Next, rose petals. You know what those look like. Me at the anointing moment. This is where the wife put her hand over his face with the shroud on top of it. The procession at a natural burial. That's a tray, a willow tray with a shrouded deceased person. This is the casket from Passages International, a wonderful company that supported earth-friendly work from the get-go. And the next slide is of the hand-woven, more expensive and very marvelous casket from Mary Lauren Fraser. Grave prep. Next. So really what makes me the funeral director I am is hands-on involvement, be it a cremation or a green burial. This photograph scares a lot of funeral directors because here's this family. There's some professional support here, but you don't need to show this to your employer if he's a green burial skeptic. They're afraid of liability, but they're waivers now. You can tell your boss that the ICCFA, if any funeral director is wanting to do green service or on the call, the ICCFA has a waiver now that the family can sign if they want to pallbear or take physical risk at the burial. Next slide. I tell cemeterians who are frightened of that kind of family carry that you can have your workers bring the casket to the grave. Okay, we'll compromise. If as part of this movement, I think, is presenting our case to skeptics and saying, all right, well, all right, you don't want the family to carry, we'll let your team carry on this one. And as they get more confidence in the usefulness and beauty of earth-friendly service, more and more, I think, will be allowed. Next. Thanks, Ryan, for doing this. Clergy love these services. And they're so very powerful with secular celebrants, family involvement, eulogies at the grave. And then the next slide, I think, is of the lowering. Oh, opportunities for music are so abundant in green service. It makes it so exciting to me to have family participation in the music at the grave. And the next slide is of the lowering of the casket, where again, in many of the cemeteries affiliated and listed by the Green Burial Council, this kind of lowering is allowed with the family's involvement. Next. With a shrouded deceased person, these are incredibly beautiful moments. If that seems stark, go to the next slide and you'll see what we do before we put earth on a shrouded deceased person. We blanket them with gorgeous evergreen boughs and almost put them to bed before the next slide, which is the filling of the grave. I call this, it's almost a trance of the full grave fill. And again, these muscle memories that are being established are so great. And those of you who have witnessed this, I don't need to tell you, but this is such a healthy thing. And next slide is, I think, the final one. The Pete Seeger song, "To My Old Brown Earth," is a wonderful anthem to the power of green burial. Guard well our human chain. Watch well you keep it strong, as long as sun will shine. And this our home, keep pure and sweet and green. For now I'm yours and you are also mine. I'll stop there, guys. And the work of Day Shelkrit, with these earth altars, morning altars with natural things, I've been encouraging my green burial families to do this at the grave, after the filling of the grave, if they have time, if the cemetery will allow. We try to create, beautiful little things to sort of complete the experience, or they can come back the next day and do this sort of beautiful mandala at the grave. Thank you for your tolerance with that.
That was great, Amy. It's like you're helping the family with their own death, making their own death ritual. And your
That is
sister.
gorgeous.
Yeah. Elizabeth, you ready to go?
Yeah, I'll pick up here. So natural burial, green burial really allows for things like this to happen. This was gorgeous. This is pine cones and rocks and some plants and some boughs from the cedar tree. And, just like her beautiful mandala at the end, I'm starting with a picture of love and beautiful things that we can do to celebrate people. Because when you're in a natural burial cemetery, there normally is a lot more breath. There's a lot more opening. People can take many more beats. I think people want to sit by the grave and just take more time, which is really, really lovely. I'm going to move through pretty quick because I know there's lots of questions. So let me see here. Go to the, let's see, that's where we are. Yeah. There we go. Okay, so this is my parlor. It's a repurposed goat barn. I'm on 40 acres. You see the garage with the Surrey with the fringe on top from Oklahoma. We do a lot outside, lots of trees, and I have got lots of grass people can park in. There's lots of people can do services under trees, all of that. So really try to allow people lots of choices, anything they want to do, from bringing their tents to sleeping in the funeral home if they want to, be next to their loved one, whatever they want, I'm fine with it. This is outside the parlor. This is someone just coming with a truck. They're transporting their own person that they can do in Oregon. They said, hey, can you help us? We're on our way to a cemetery. We need a little bit of help wrapping. So again, the gurney comes out. Here we are. We're on private land. We can do whatever the heck we want to do. And so again, really happy to be able to provide things like that. Looky, there is a standard coach with a natural wood casket. There's a pine box going to the cemetery, right? Why not? Make it happen. When people want to wrap people with something, these are some natural fabrics. We have some Kincarico from Esmeralda, Kent, some wash, pine bottom here, just showing people you can do this yourself. I've got a lot of people come in the funeral home who want to bathe, who want to do their own shrouding, who want to sit with their loved one. Fantastic. I do a lot of natural makeup. Here you see some paprika and some vitamin E oil and a brush that I've been able to mold together and make lovely coloring. Again, I've been able to use, we've got bushes outside. I'm in the country. There's some raspberries and some carrot oil. And again, I've been able to bring a nice sheen to people's faces with natural cosmetics. I'm not really a makeup gal, so it's just been nice to be able to do this and make this happen for people. This is kind of like the inner workings of the funeral home and how I spend my time. This is in my chapel. This is a cardboard box. This is a man who's holding apples in his hands, and he's got some flowers and the books that him and his sister used to read at the evening. They would drink their tea and eat their apples and read their books. And here he is in my chapel, and the sister sat with him all day and said she wasn't ready to leave. And I said, my darling, here's the key. I'm leaving. See you tomorrow. Leave if you want, whatever you want to do. And she went across the street and got a little picnic at the mom and pop little snack shop. And she was there the next morning having breakfast. How lovely. So again, happy to be able to provide these things to people. This is a baby casket, a little pine casket. This funeral home, we take care of all babies in the Portland metro area for no charge. So hospitals call us all the time. Most families choose cremation. This family wanted a basic pine casket. My computer is actually on a full-size pine casket. In my room, behind me is a shrouding board, and then some other shrouding boards too. So again, I've got some wonderful, I've got a Vietnam veteran who lives pretty close by who makes these wonderful boards for me. And again, Ken Caracco is a wonderful source. There's a lot of other people locally. This is what it looks like when somebody's digging a space in a yard. There's a backhoe, there's someone's yard. Now you can use a smaller tractor, of course, but this is sort of what it looks like as well. We put a lowering device together. Those are 2x6s. There's a hole in the middle of all of the flora and all of the root system and the forest, and people are going to come and lay a casket or an alternative container or an eco pod or whatever on that. Really sort of what it looks like. I do a lot of shrouding here, sheet off the bed. I encourage people to be as economical as they want. We are the least expensive funeral home in the whole Portland metro area. Raised the prices once in the 20 years we've been here. So I tell people, you got an organic sheet? Let's have 2 of them. Let's use it. 2 queen size sheets is really enough to shroud somebody. There you go. There's some flowers from the little farm stand. We're in a place in Boring, Oregon, where people have berries for sale on the corner and people have natural flowers they sell and they're selling them. So that's just, again, this is a standard. This is a cemetery, which hybrid. It has standard burials and it has a green section. That's what that looks like. This is a family's yard. They had a really lovely shroud. They said, could you wrap our sister in this? Here we are in the yard. You see the different ground, the different sort of style. We have plywood lowering into the ground. Plywood will be taken out. We don't have rope this time. We have straps. Again, people figure it out as they go. And this is a wonderful Marine saluting his father, who is wrapped in a sheet. It's a comforter sheet combination he had on his bed. It has a wonderful Marine insignia on it. He had that on him in the care home, and it was a duvet and it was cotton. And I said, let's wrap him in it. I think that's beautiful. So there he is in that, and he'll be put to rest in that at our national cemetery. You know why we can have green burial? Because we kept asking, what if a family doesn't want a concrete liner? What if we just want to go ahead and place them lovingly into the ground? What do you think about that? And pretty soon people said, why not? So again, ask and you shall receive. And this is natural organic reduction. Wanted to throw this out here. That's me putting somebody into the cradle. And this is in Herland Forest in Waukiakis, Washington. Natural organic reduction. Of course, this is something that we now have 5 states that are doing this. We have 4 facilities in Washington. We have 1 facility in Colorado, Oregon, Vermont, California, all say okay, but not facilities up and running. So again, this is the human composting that people talk about. And that, my friends, is that. Okay.
Wow, such
So if you all want
different
Yeah.
ways of doing things, but both really good, and both letting the family have more hands-on in their own family's death ritual, which is beautiful. Well, there's a lot of questions. Ryan, do you want to read them out?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first question that we have is from Emily, who's wondering, specifically Amy, if you ever encounter the pressure to embalm when working with churches or bosses, if the family is hoping to have a viewing.
No, but I was wise, I think, to work with Jewish partnership. I think if I worked with a different team, there would be more resistance. And we have a large refrigerated space, which has been amazingly useful to us. I know many people who do find that pressure. And It's just a matter of working with them and showing them that, all right, we don't have a refrigerated space. It's August. Maybe we could bring dry ice into the prep room and put the deceased on that. Churches, sometimes we don't mention that the deceased hasn't been embalmed, and there might, if I know it's going to be a short viewing, I'm comfortable with that. I don't ever deceive anyone, but no one asks and no one needs to know, and everybody's amazed at how good the individual looks sometimes, so it all works out.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And then Elizabeth, how do you handle pricing when a family sort of wants an a la carte approach? Maybe they just want help with paperwork or transportation. Mary is suggesting that they are finding that families are dismayed when they're only offered a package when they want to do a lot of things on their own.
Yeah, that's a great question. Families that I serve can do whatever they'd like. If they just want to talk to me on the phone and ask a bunch of questions, I don't charge for information. That's no problem. Sometimes I cut paste places of my book and email it to them. That's no problem. If I'm doing a death certificate and permit and taking care of some paperwork, $100 takes care of my time. That's fine. Sometimes I'm just driving somebody somewhere. And again, a la carte is fine. We don't have, the price lists are written out a certain way, and to satisfy our mortuary board, they're listed a certain way where all the fees are there. But again, people, as long as it's on there and it's transparent, they can do what they want. And then what we tend to do, I say we, it's me and my husband, we tend to just pretty much give it all away. That's just the reality of it. I think that there's charges that say things, but I mean, if a family can't pay, they can't pay, and that's fine. I find that just, yeah, the blessings come exponentially, and money has never been something I've cared much about. And because of that, it's actually worked out okay. So that's one of the beauties in the world.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And then a question for both of you from Megan. Have either of you heard anything good or bad out of the green embalming solutions that are coming out?
Both Champion and Dodge make formaldehyde-free formulas. We've experimented with them a bit and found that they don't make the body hard, and I think this is a good thing. Embalmers have to get used to it. There's also a period of setup, and you try not to move the deceased person off the embalming table after embalming with these kinds of fluids that are formaldehyde free. I think there's a lot of promise with them, that maybe it could be a transitional thing, but I've never needed them at an eco-friendly cemetery. And it would be problematic with a conservation ground or anyone expecting a body that is completely chemical free. Because even with the formaldehyde free fluids, I think there's some pretty strong disinfectant in there. And the cases I've had have been more in hybrid cemeteries and traditional kinds of burial grounds. But they are out there. And again, if you're needing to take baby steps with an employer or a skeptic, that's a solution that gives some of the results of a conventional embalming and yet does not have the toxic potential of formaldehyde, which is a gas, by the way, and dissipates. It doesn't so much, I think some of us in the early days were exaggerating the risks of formaldehyde to the earth. It's a risk to the embalmer. More embalmers are wearing respirators today, and that's very good news. I think Monica Torres is an embalmer touring all the funeral shows these days. She teaches conventional methods as well as natural. So if you want to get natural training in the prep room, Monica Torres is a fantastic online course that I highly recommend.
And Amy, you did a great job answering that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Elizabeth, Emily would like to know if you have any tips about talking to national cemeteries near you about allowing natural burial.
Yes, so I tell people all the time, if you want to go ahead and have a natural burial, don't ask them, do you do green burial? Because they probably don't know what that is. Just merely ask, is it okay to have a burial here without a grave liner? And some people will say, well, no, this is our hard and fast rule. This is what we do. This is how it is. If that's the case, then maybe you can ask, can you turn that liner upside down? Personal story is my father, devout Catholic, wanted to be in the Catholic graveyard next to my mother and his parents. And I just asked nicely. I just went in and said, my father is having, this is just a couple of years ago, my father is having a service and this is what I would love. And he wanted to have a green burial and he's in a natural casket and he's not embalmed and he's in a biodegradable suit. He wore to my college graduation. And what do you think about this? And I asked nicely and I explained and the guy said, yeah, honey, that sounds great. I'll do it for you. So it's not such a hard thing. They still got the integrity of the cemetery where it's going to be even, but he got his sort of hybrid green burial and he's satisfied and I was very satisfied. So asking, and a lot of cemeteries will be thrilled that you're just going to come in and buy a space. They really don't care that you're going to have a concrete liner, or they might say, well, you know, our board has always just done it this way, but I guess it doesn't matter. So it's just having the conversation is a really big thing to do. And then to piggyback on that, we had a small little cemetery here that wasn't doing much. And I talked to Ed Bixby about it, who's the president of the Green Burial Council. And he said, well, you know, let's see what'll happen. So we talked to the people who are running it and said, oh gosh, we'd love to have it off of our hands. Great. And now it's a green burial cemetery. So it just asks, it's just a conversation and it's just being kind. I think it's a really big thing. It's just speaking from your heart and saying, this is really why I'd like to do this.
That's a great answer. Similarly, I had a case in Connecticut. Connecticut is a heavily vaulted cemetery state. And we just asked the cemetery, and the family made the initial argument, you know, we just don't want to have a vault. And the cemetery said, well, we always use vaults. And they said, well, we don't want to do it. And we're considering not even burying her if you make us. And so then the cemeterian, the manager, said to me, all right, I'm going to do this just once. And if it doesn't go well, I'm never going to do it again. So we had our green burial and it went very, very well. And he was amazed at the number of people who came. And I was encouraging him to go to the local newspaper and get press that now he offered green burial. I don't think he took me up on that. But again, small steps, we're paving a way. And also there's some skepticism here in New York. A lot of our cemeteries are unionized, and the union workers, especially post-COVID, have been anxious about shrouds, shrouded burial, exposure to the body of a deceased person. They're not used to that. I think the biggest thing that we could do going forward in this movement is convince more cemeteries of the beauty and the merits of shrouded burial without any casket at all. Then we get around that whole domestically made casket, imported casket. I think just the board and the tray and a beautifully wrapped body that's been kept cool, that doesn't have an odor. If we can show cemeteries that this can be a success, I think we'll really make headway in changing the funeral industry and showing families just how gorgeous a graveside service can be, with a body in fabric and flowers, rosemary tossed in, you know, music, all of that, the march to the grave, the ceremony, the eulogies. I've been thinking lately, and I'd be interested in your reaction. I think just to say to people who are unsure, I'm guaranteeing you this is going to be a heck of a funeral. It's going to be a marvelous service, you know, just on the grounds. You don't need to get into climate change with skeptics. You don't need to get into, you know, formaldehyde contaminating the groundwater. It's just a great funeral. And when they hear that, and some religious funeral directors I've met with begin to kind of get excited about the ceremonial potential, the potential for community reviews and excitement about funeral service again, So that's been my latest tact when I'm here in New York, trying to show people how great these services are.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was so encouraging and also very practical in a lot of ways. Thank you. Amy, we have a question from Jasmine speaking about changes in the industry. Jasmine writes that they hope to be able to do natural organic reduction in New York someday. And they know that the legalization was denied last year, but do you think it's a possibility possibly in the near future?
Yes, I think, it's really interesting here. There's another bill, and I've heard people talking about it. The resistance is coming from the usual places, the Roman Catholic Church, and other religious leaders, but also there was surprise resistance from the Funeral Directors Association here in New York. They don't oppose the method. They like the method. They want to have facilities that they can own. And because New York State is one of these crazy states where funeral directors can't own crematories or cemeteries, this is unusual. The funeral directors have come out in opposition of natural organic reduction because the way the bill is written, they're prohibited from any ownership stake. So they'd like to see a revise on that. But I don't think that their voices will be as acknowledged as others. And I think we have a good possibility, I'm hoping anyway, that we get it legalized, and then it'll be some years before it actually goes into operation. But how great would that be, right? And that would make the urban funeral much more eco-friendly, because a lot of my work here in Brooklyn is driving people in the car using gasoline, fossil fuel, to take people upstate 2.5 hours where the grave space is more affordable. So how great would it be to have something closer to the city that would expedite the green burial process as natural organic reduction does. So fingers crossed, it's going to happen. It's just going to take time. And how privileged we are to be witnessing all these changes. It's discouraging sometimes, but I think we should all give ourselves pats on the back for being as vigilant as we have been and changing as much as we have in the last 10 years.
Thank you so much. A question for Elizabeth from Lisa. What would you say when cemeteries are concerned about heavy equipment operation on natural graves?
I think it depends where you are, what's going on. Sometimes these cemeteries that are hybrid, they have the graves in between trees and maybe an area that wasn't developed anyway, because it was hard to make the rows and put the concrete liners in them. So it is a tenuous kind of area where even a small kubota would be tricky. You're going to get somebody using with shovels anyway. Taking heavy equipment over a grave really is fine, because graves can get backfilled. Also, when there's a green burial, there's a mound of soil that rests in its way and just naturally down. I think some of these people take care to fill dirt if they need. And a lot of these places don't even need to do that, because again, it's remote enough. Sometimes the family can get involved. So it just depends on who's doing the actual digging and preparing of the space. Is it going to be a place where you're going to be hybrid, for instance, where every grave probably is going to be dug that way in unison? Or is it going to be something where we just really want to be as gentle on the earth as possible and really don't even want many cars on the land? We really want to make this as really eco-preservish as usual. It's good. Preservish, that wasn't a word, but you know what I mean.
Most certainly, thank you. A question for Amy from, I believe it's pronounced Andra, but I apologize if I mispronounce anyone's names. Please correct me. For Amy, do you have recommendations for how a conservation burial ground can and should approach funeral homes to promote the opportunity for families?
I think pictures help a lot. I have a lot of photos, as Elizabeth does. Elizabeth's social media is so awesome. These photos of these burials that, like the ones we showed tonight, help rehearse the eyes of the skeptic. And so when you're working with someone, to show them how the magnificence of these services, and also any kind of public reaction, the press, the promise of community support and enthusiasm for these services, all of that really helps. Does that answer your
And it's
question?
a story and the human connection. It's really a lot of people just wanting to just do something their own way that celebrates their person. And everyone who has been helped with one of these services, Amy probably can attest to it too, say, wow, I wouldn't do anything different. This is amazing. I want to do this for the next person in my family. So again, having it really be what it could be to celebrate the love of that person.
Yep. Sometimes families have had a service in another state, and if they talk to the funeral director that they're with now, about how great it was, how well it worked, the more positive stories people hear, the better. And it's so uplifting, isn't it? I've seen families, even after a suicide, as sad as they are, they almost, I'm not being cute, but it's like they skip out of the cemetery. They're elated with what they built. They feel so strongly that this represented their loved one and that this was right, and as tragic as everything has been, at least they got outside in a beautiful place and separated from their loved one in a passionate, natural way. It just doesn't get any better than that. So there's some good films as well, that are also magnificent. I'm trying to think of the best ones. What do you think is the best green burial documentary that is out there?
Well, there's a Will for the Woods, which is great. I think Departures is just moving, the way that he has this job where he's going to shroud and love these people, and his community says you're dirty and gross. So I think some of that perseverance is beautiful that comes across in that film.
I got, when I was leaving the firm where I was trained, I had photographs that families had given me permission to use. And that's how I wooed the Jewish firm, because I went out, I first met in the office with them, and then we went out to dinner, but I had a PowerPoint of images of the services I'd been doing as a resident and as a newly licensed director. And I could see that his eyes widened, and he was leaning forward. He was like, this is really interesting. This is great, And I remember he said in kind of a condescending way, you have to just tolerate this sometimes. He said, I think you have a niche. And I think you could come into the firm and be your own entity and do the work you do. So that's how we started. And I'd say it's been a pretty good success.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you both so much. This has been so robust and so generative. Thank you all so much for your time tonight and for sharing all of this with us. I think we have time for maybe one more question I think we can squeeze in. There are some questions regarding making your own shrouding boards and if they are encouraged or recommended.
Yes.
Yeah, it's great. And it could be, we're very blessed here in Brooklyn, and you probably have one in your community where there's a lumber yard run by hipsters who sell repurposed lumber. Some of it's live edge, some of it's just adopted wood that they've found after the cutting of a beech tree in New Jersey or something. They bring that in and they sell that, and cut it for me. And it's been a wonderful way to avoid the extra expense of the tray or another kind of plywood. I just tend not to use new wood when I can help it. I'm sure you do the same thing. I think
And it
just
allows people to just be more hands-on, which I think people feel like they're part and they're active and they're doing something. You could either bring a lasagna to someone's home, or you can possibly say, hey, I can get some repurposed wood and create a shrouding board, carrying board. What a lovely gift for that family.
that's awesome. I think mostly we just can't get discouraged as activists and as believers in this movement. I'm seeing a lot of changes that are encouraging, and look what we've built. And thank goodness to the earliest pioneers who set up those conservation grounds and did a lot of the legwork. And thank you to Mark Harris. A wonderful book, helpful in my early career, was written by the Los Angeles Times environmental reporter, Mark Harris. It's called Grave Matters. And that's like a nice little Bible to the green burial movement that's still very relevant. Caitlin Doty's books, other authors. There's lots of wisdom, so much work done by Lee Webster, who I think is still on the call. Hats off for all that effort into guiding, and the new website for funeral crafters and makers of caskets, urns. It's the Funeral Artists Collective. I think somebody put it in the comments. Be on the watch for that, and think of your own projects and own way that you could also, as an activist, begin to create things for families who are too stressed to do it for themselves.
When my little dog died, I buried her in a scrap piece of Japanese kimono fabric. And then I took another piece and made like a wall hanging out of it, just a narrow one. But it was super sweet and special. There's so much you can do, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I also encourage people to take your time to read the Green Burial Council website. There's so much information. There are so many photos, there's videos, there's conversations, all the peer-to-peer forums are on there. And that's put together for people like you who want more information and to find other cemeteries and other funeral homes who have been vetted and who are doing this work. You can call those individuals and talk to them and ask what their involvement is. Again, it's all education. There's an interactive map, and it's also there who are tooling around. They do a pretty good job to get hits when people are asking questions about natural burial. So it's an excellent resource. It's free. It's at your fingertips, and I highly encourage you to take a look at it.
Yes, and we have a peer-to-peer Facebook group if you want to join that. And I'm the one who answers the info box. So if you can't find something on the website or you're looking for something, just write the info box and I'll write you back. I think that's about it, you guys. You both
Someone asked how we can connect. I'll post my email in the chat. And we're both on Instagram, right?
Yes. And there's
I
only one
love
funeral home in
Instagram.
Bowling, Oregon. So you probably could find me too. And I encourage calls, emails too, if anybody has any questions about anything, no matter what state you're in, happy to answer telephone or email. So
Me too.
Cornerstone Funeral Board.
Me too. I've been having dinners for doulas and female directors. Haven't had a request
Awesome.
from a guy. We're not excluding men, but we've had some very lively evenings networking and supporting each other. So I encourage that.
That's great,
Yes.
Amy. I bet a lot of people want to come to your dinners. I know I would.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing. When you get a bunch of doulas and directors together, it's a wonderful conversation.
Yeah. Well, okay. Elizabeth and Amy, thank you so much for doing this. I'm so glad that you agreed and that we could make this happen for everyone. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Welcome. Thank you.
And
Goodbye,
if
everyone.
anybody needs me, I'm at info@greenburialcouncil.org or Gretchen@greenburialcouncil.org.
Thank you, Ryan and Gretchen, for your hard work in making this happen. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, Ryan. And then this will eventually be on our Green Burial Council YouTube channel. I can't tell you when. It'll probably be a couple weeks though. So
Great.
thanks, everybody.